Hello, my name is Jeremy Gibbard, and the title of my paper is The Rapid Identification and Evaluation of Interventions for Improved Water Performance at South African Schools. In the paper, I'm going to cover global water risks and water scarcity in Africa, and then look at South Africa in particular in terms of the context and also schools themselves. I'll then go through the research questions that I look at in the paper. I'll introduce the school water use model, which is a tool I developed, the data that went into the school water use model, or SWAM, and then look at the results that came out of the modeling, and also look at some of the interventions that we undertook and their impacts, and then very briefly cover discussions, conclusions, and recommendations. So first of all, the case study is in Pretoria, South Africa, which is where the red circle is. And you can see in terms of the World Resources Institute maps on global water risks, it's either high or very high. So it's right on the north of South Africa, and you can see a lot of these areas are indicated as very high risk. What is also interesting is that if we look at UNEP's description of water scarcity, they cover two different aspects. One is economic water scarcity, which is about limited human, institutional, or financial capital to get water to where it's needed. And the second type is physical water scarcity. So this is where there may be the infrastructure for water, but there isn't locally sufficient water. And from this map, you can see Africa has both types. A large area in the middle has what's called economic water scarcity. And then if we look at South Africa, it has physical water scarcity. And again, the case study is in the area that's defined as physical water scarcity. And if we look at the detail of South Africa, we have had recently major water shortages in Cape Town, and many of the big cities are vulnerable to water shortages. And climate change is going to make this worse, and a lot of the water supplies are going to become increasingly unpredictable. In some areas of South Africa, water supplies have become increasingly unreliable. And as a result, a lot of municipalities have increased the tariffs, and there's a kind of general consensus within the country to look at conservation and to look at efficiency. What is interesting about water is that schools are severely affected. So the first set of pictures that I showed you earlier, those are schools in the Northern Cape, which is a very dry area. And these are schools in KwaZulu-Natal, which is much wetter. But if a school has a water shortage, often the school will be closed. Children miss classes and exam results drop. Sometimes children have to repeat years. So there are major impacts of having no water at schools. What you will also find is that schools that rely on flush toilets have to pay very large costs associated with that water. And the interesting thing with schools is that schools have a very strong influence on the area around them, where learners can actually influence their parents. So we can look at interventions around water efficiency. So they're very interesting building type, because you can have a much bigger impact than just the efficiency within the actual school buildings. So the particular study looks at how water is used in a case study school, and how we can model that water consumption, and then what sort of options we can use to test and determine which are going to be the best, the optimal, the smartest and most sustainable solutions to that particular school, and then what recommendations can be made for other schools and for that particular school. So the next thing is to look at the school water use model, and this is an Excel-based tool which was developed by me and uses readily available data. So things like the school years, learner numbers, the performance of fittings, municipal bills, and it then allows a user to try different interventions. So interventions to do with different technologies, behavior, and test that and see what the implications are. The whole idea behind the tool is that it's very simple to use and could be used by school principals, teachers, staff, and pupils themselves. And the whole point of the tool itself is to quickly try some of the different interventions to try and identify the best opportunities to reduce water consumption and costs. So the inputs that we've used in this case study are a set around buildings on the site, a set around occupants, so learner numbers, staff numbers, the schedule over a year, tariffs, and then some detail on ratios and usage, some assumptions in terms of how equipment is used over the year. So that data is put into the SWAM, and this is the data that's generated in the model. And what you can see here is that you get a monthly consumption in kiloliters for different uses: toilets, urinals, wash hand basins, showers, etc. Annual use in kiloliters, liters per meter squared per day, liters per person per day, and then the percentages. And so you get a very simple report that gives you a picture of water use in the school. What we then did was identify 5 different interventions that we could try to use to reduce water consumption at the school. So the first is reducing irrigated recreational lawns. The second is eliminating all lawns, all irrigated areas, including sports fields. The third is replacing all the toilets with dual flush toilets, so much lower flush rates. The fourth is installing rainwater harvesting system and using this to flush toilets. And then the final one is looking at dry toilets and waterless urinals, so toilets that don't need water. So what's interesting, if we look back at those results, we see that toilets are responsible for about 71% of the water consumption and irrigation for about 18% of total water consumption. So if we look at both of those and we replaced toilet technology and we used a dry technology, dry sanitation technology that didn't need water, and we avoided irrigation. So we swapped, we used artificial turf, for instance, instead of irrigated lawns. We could reduce water consumption in the school by about 90%. So there's a huge reduction in water consumption. And in the context of somewhere like South Africa, that's very valuable because it's an enormous reduction in water consumption, and that reduces the pressure on municipal systems. What it also does is significantly reduce the costs of water for the school. So in looking at the options, one option is then to just understand rainwater harvesting potential at the school, and what this slide shows is some quick calculations to estimate the rainwater harvesting potential. So if we use the standard equation of rainwater supply being meter cubed per year is the rainfall in terms of meters per year times the catchment area in meters squared times the runoff coefficient. And we have this data, so we can do a quick calculation of the area, the roof area of the school, and we get about 5,130 square meters. We know it's got a corrugated iron roof, and the runoff coefficient for that is 0.9. And the average rainfall for Pretoria is 690 millimeters per year. So there's a very long dry period in the middle, but we can then input that and we get the potential rainwater supply at the school, which gives us 3,186 kiloliters. So what's interesting is then to take this figure and compare it to the requirements, and with flush toilets, we know flush toilets and irrigation, we know the school needs about 4,247 kiloliters. However, the school without flush toilets and irrigation only needs about 3,000 kiloliters. So what's interesting here is that this suggests that rainwater supply could actually meet all of the needs of a school if there aren't flush toilets and irrigation. So coming to the conclusions of the study, most water in school, in this particular case study school in Pretoria, is used to flush toilets, about 71%, or for irrigation, which is about 18%. If a dry toilet technology is used and irrigation is avoided, water consumption could be reduced by about 90% and would be about 3,031 kiloliters per year. The rainwater calculations that were done show that about 3,186 kiloliters of rainwater could be harvested. So if you divert all the water from a lot of the school classroom roofs to rainwater tanks, you could harvest very substantial amounts of water that could meet all the needs of the school. And the school then would not be reliant on municipal water supplies and would be far more resilient. So it would never have to close if there was a water shortage or the outages from the municipality. So what's important here is to just think back to the slides right at the beginning, where we showed the picture of Africa with economic and physical water scarcity. And it's clear that consideration of using rainwater harvesting in areas of economic water scarcity may make a lot of sense. So you don't need all of the municipal infrastructure. You put in rainwater harvesting systems and you can meet all your water requirements. So there's enormous advantage in new buildings in areas where there's sufficient rainwater. In existing areas, also quite important to look at the type of toilets put in, and if there's a major refurbishment, look at avoiding flush toilets, look at reducing irrigation in existing schools and new schools. So the last slide, recommendations. Some further work on dry technology in schools should be carried out to make sure that they're practical, they work. There are some good examples, but it would be good to look at different scenarios in different areas and make sure that you get a robust technology. The second one is to do life cycle costing, to really look at the long-term cost implications of rainwater harvesting systems and the dry toilet technology, so that you understand long-term costs. And if these show that these technologies and this approach make sense, this should be integrated in school design and management guidelines developed by the sector. So thank you very much. These are my details. You're welcome to drop me an email. Also, I'm on LinkedIn, and ask questions and get in touch if you need to. Thank you very much.